Richard Scrushy built HealthSouth Corporation from a single rehabilitation clinic into the largest provider of outpatient surgery and rehabilitative healthcare services in the United States. At its peak, the company operated more than 1,800 facilities across all 50 states and generated billions in annual revenue. Scrushy became one of the most celebrated healthcare executives in America, a man who rubbed shoulders with politicians, owned multiple mansions, collected expensive art, and lived like corporate royalty in Birmingham, Alabama. But behind the glossy annual reports and soaring stock prices, a massive fraud was underway. For nearly a decade, HealthSouth executives systematically falsified the company's earnings, inflating profits by at least $2.7 billion. It remains one of the largest accounting frauds in American healthcare history, and the man at the top claimed he knew nothing about it. Richard Scrushy was born on October 26, 1952, in Selma, Alabama. He grew up in modest circumstances and worked his way through college, earning a degree in respiratory therapy from the University of Alabama at Birmingham. He later completed an MBA from the same institution. In his 20s, Scrushy worked as a respiratory therapist before moving into healthcare management. He took positions at Lifemark Corporation, a Houston-based hospital company, where he rose through the ranks and learned the business side of healthcare delivery. By his early 30s, he had developed a vision for a new kind of healthcare company, one focused specifically on outpatient rehabilitation services. In 1984, at the age of 31, Scrushy founded HealthSouth Corporation in Birmingham, Alabama, along with 4 partners. The company started with a single outpatient rehabilitation facility. The timing proved fortuitous. Medicare reimbursement policies in the 1980s increasingly favored outpatient treatment over lengthy hospital stays, and HealthSouth positioned itself perfectly to capture this shift. The company grew at a remarkable pace. HealthSouth went public in 1986, just 2 years after its founding. Throughout the late 1980s and 1990s, the company expanded aggressively through acquisitions and new facility construction. By the mid-1990s, HealthSouth had become the dominant player in outpatient rehabilitation and surgery, operating hundreds of facilities nationwide. Scrushy cultivated an image as a visionary entrepreneur and a generous philanthropist. He donated millions to universities, hospitals, and community organizations in Alabama. He served on corporate boards and became a fixture in Birmingham's social elite. His compensation packages made him one of the highest-paid executives in American healthcare, earning tens of millions of dollars annually in salary, bonuses, and stock options. Wall Street loved HealthSouth. Throughout the 1990s, the company consistently met or exceeded analyst expectations for quarterly earnings. This predictability made the stock attractive to investors, and Scrushy regularly touted the company's financial performance to analysts and shareholders. But maintaining that perfect track record created enormous pressure inside the company. Former executives would later testify that Scrushy set aggressive earnings targets and made clear that failure to meet them was unacceptable. The corporate culture revolved around hitting the numbers that Wall Street expected. The problem was that HealthSouth's actual performance couldn't always match those expectations. Starting in 1996, according to federal prosecutors, the company began systematically falsifying its financial statements to bridge the gap between real earnings and the numbers Scrushy had promised to investors. The scheme worked like this. After each quarter closed, senior financial executives would compare actual earnings to Wall Street's expectations. When there was a shortfall, they would fabricate fictitious revenue entries to make up the difference. These fake entries were recorded in the company's accounting systems and then incorporated into the official financial statements filed with the Securities and Exchange Commission. The fraudulent entries were often described internally as filling the gap or making adjustments to meet expectations. Over time, the gap between reality and the reported numbers grew larger and larger. What might have started as relatively small adjustments eventually ballooned into billions of dollars in fictitious assets and earnings. The fraud at HealthSouth was not the work of a single individual. Federal prosecutors eventually charged more than 15 former HealthSouth executives with participating in the scheme. 5 chief financial officers who served the company between 1996 and 2002 pleaded guilty to criminal charges related to the fraud. These executives later testified that the scheme operated with Scrushy's knowledge and direction. According to their accounts, meetings were held after each quarter where the gap between actual and expected earnings was discussed. Scrushy allegedly participated in these meetings and approved the fraudulent adjustments needed to meet targets. William Owens, who served as HealthSouth's CFO, pleaded guilty in 2003 and agreed to cooperate with prosecutors. He testified that Scrushy personally directed him to make false entries in the company's books. Weston Smith, another former CFO, provided similar testimony, as did other members of the financial team. The mechanics of the fraud were relatively straightforward, but executed on a massive scale. Fake entries were made to inflate revenue from the company's various facilities. Fictitious assets, particularly in accounts receivable and fixed assets, were created on the balance sheet. The company's internal accounting staff, working under direction from senior executives, made thousands of false entries over the years. To conceal the fraud from outside auditors, executives maintained 2 sets of records. The real numbers were tracked internally, while the falsified figures were presented to Ernst & Young, the company's independent auditor. Auditors were given documentation supporting the fake entries, and the fraud was structured to avoid the kinds of large, obvious discrepancies that might trigger closer scrutiny. The fraud at HealthSouth might have continued indefinitely if not for a whistleblower. In early 2003, the FBI received information from Weston Smith, who had recently left the company and was willing to cooperate with authorities. On March 19, 2003, the FBI raided HealthSouth's corporate headquarters in Birmingham. That same day, the Securities and Exchange Commission filed civil fraud charges against the company and against Richard Scrushy personally. The SEC alleged that HealthSouth had overstated its earnings by at least $1.4 billion since 1999. That figure would eventually grow substantially as investigators dug deeper into the company's books. The scale of the fraud shocked Wall Street and the healthcare industry. HealthSouth's stock, which had traded as high as $30 per share in the late 1990s, collapsed to less than $1. Shareholders lost billions. The company's very survival came into question. In the weeks and months following the raid, one HealthSouth executive after another agreed to cooperate with federal prosecutors. By the end of 2003, more than a dozen former officers had pleaded guilty to various fraud charges. Almost all of them pointed to Richard Scrushy as the architect of the scheme. Scrushy maintained his innocence from the beginning. He claimed he had been deceived by subordinates and had no knowledge of the accounting fraud. His lawyers argued that the CFOs and other financial executives had acted on their own, concealing the truth from the CEO. Richard Scrushy was indicted by a federal grand jury in November 2003. The indictment charged him with 85 counts, including conspiracy, securities fraud, money laundering, and making false statements. Prosecutors argued that Scrushy had personally directed the fraud and had certified false financial statements, knowing they were inaccurate. The trial began in January 2005 in Birmingham, Alabama, Scrushy's hometown. The government's case relied heavily on the testimony of former HealthSouth executives who had already pleaded guilty. Prosecutors presented evidence that Scrushy had signed off on quarterly earnings reports, participated in meetings where fraudulent adjustments were discussed, and enriched himself through stock sales based on the inflated numbers. Scrushy's defense team attacked the credibility of the cooperating witnesses. They argued that these executives were liars who had committed the fraud themselves and were now blaming Scrushy to obtain lighter sentences. The defense emphasized that no documentary evidence directly showed Scrushy ordering the fraud. There were no emails, no memos, no recordings of Scrushy explicitly directing subordinates to falsify the books. During the 6-month trial, Scrushy transformed his public image. He became a regular presence at a predominantly African-American church in Birmingham, appearing on a religious television program and cultivating relationships in the local community. Given that the jury pool was drawn from the Birmingham area, where Scrushy remained a prominent figure and philanthropist, this strategy may have influenced perceptions of the defendant. On June 28, 2005, the jury returned its verdict. Richard Scrushy was acquitted on all 36 counts he faced. The verdict stunned prosecutors and legal observers. Despite the testimony of more than a dozen cooperating witnesses, the jury found that the government had not proven beyond a reasonable doubt that Scrushy knew about and participated in the fraud. Scrushy's freedom was short-lived. Even as the accounting fraud trial proceeded, federal investigators in a separate case were examining his relationship with Don Siegelman, the former governor of Alabama. In 2006, Scrushy and Siegelman were indicted together on charges of bribery, conspiracy, and mail fraud. The government alleged that Scrushy had arranged approximately $500,000 in donations to Siegelman's lottery campaign in exchange for appointment to the State Hospital Regulatory Board, the Certificate of Need Review Board. This board had significant influence over healthcare facility construction and expansion in Alabama, decisions that directly affected HealthSouth's business interests. The trial took place in 2006 in Montgomery, Alabama. Unlike the accounting fraud case, this trial resulted in conviction. On June 29, 2006, almost exactly 1 year after his acquittal in Birmingham, Scrushy was found guilty of bribery, conspiracy, and other charges. Scrushy was sentenced to 6 years and 10 months in federal prison. He was also ordered to pay $267,000 in restitution. Siegelman received a 7-year sentence. Both men appealed their convictions, arguing, among other things, that the government had criminalized routine political activity. The appeals were largely unsuccessful, though Siegelman's sentence was later reduced. Scrushy reported to federal prison in 2007. He served his sentence at various facilities and was released in 2012. While Scrushy escaped criminal conviction for the accounting fraud, he faced devastating civil consequences. Shareholders, investors, and regulators pursued him through the courts for years. In 2009, a civil jury in Birmingham found Scrushy liable for his role in the HealthSouth fraud. The jury awarded $2.87 billion in damages to shareholders, one of the largest civil verdicts in Alabama history. Scrushy was ordered to repay hundreds of millions of dollars in bonuses and stock profits he had received during the fraud years. The Securities and Exchange Commission also pursued civil charges. Scrushy was permanently barred from serving as an officer or director of any public company. He was ordered to disgorge more than $81 million in ill-gotten gains and to pay additional civil penalties. These judgments effectively destroyed Scrushy's fortune. He was forced to sell his mansions, his art collection, his boats, and other assets. By the time the legal proceedings concluded, the man who had once been worth hundreds of millions of dollars was financially ruined. HealthSouth Corporation itself survived the scandal, though barely. After the fraud was exposed in 2003, the company underwent a complete restructuring. New management was brought in, and the board was overhauled. The company restated years of financial results, revealing the true extent of the fabricated earnings. In 2007, HealthSouth settled SEC charges by agreeing to permanent injunctions and other remedial measures. The company also settled class action lawsuits brought by shareholders for approximately $445 million. Under new leadership, HealthSouth rebuilt its operations and reputation. In 2016, the company changed its name to Encompass Health Corporation, symbolically distancing itself from the Scrushy era. Today, Encompass Health remains one of the largest providers of rehabilitation services in the United States, operating more than 150 hospitals across the country. The HealthSouth scandal exposed critical weaknesses in corporate governance and financial oversight during the early 2000s. The fraud occurred during the same period as the Enron and WorldCom scandals, and together, these cases prompted major reforms in American securities law. The Sarbanes-Oxley Act of 2002, passed in response to these corporate scandals, imposed new requirements on public companies. CEOs and CFOs were required to personally certify the accuracy of financial statements, with criminal penalties for false certifications. Audit committees were strengthened, and auditor independence rules were tightened. Ernst & Young, HealthSouth's longtime auditor, faced criticism for failing to detect the fraud despite years of annual audits. The firm settled SEC charges and paid $109 million to resolve claims related to its HealthSouth work. The case highlighted the limitations of traditional audit procedures when management actively conspires to deceive auditors. The HealthSouth fraud also demonstrated the difficulty of prosecuting corporate executives for financial crimes. Despite overwhelming testimony from cooperating witnesses, Scrushy's criminal defense succeeded by attacking witness credibility and emphasizing the absence of direct documentary evidence. The acquittal prompted discussions about jury selection in white-collar cases and the challenges prosecutors face when key witnesses are themselves admitted criminals seeking leniency. After his release from federal prison in 2012, Richard Scrushy largely retreated from public life. He relocated to Texas, far from Birmingham, where his name had become synonymous with corporate scandal. In recent years, Scrushy has made occasional media appearances, maintaining his innocence in the accounting fraud and criticizing the bribery prosecution as politically motivated. He has spoken about his religious faith and his efforts to rebuild his life after prison. The civil judgments against him remain largely unpaid. Collection efforts have continued for years, though Scrushy's attorneys have argued that he lacks the assets to satisfy the multi-billion-dollar verdicts. Richard Scrushy's story is a cautionary tale about the dangers of corporate culture built around meeting Wall Street expectations at any cost. A man who created one of America's largest healthcare companies, who earned hundreds of millions of dollars and wielded enormous influence, ultimately lost everything because the numbers had to be hit, no matter what it took to make them appear real on paper. The $2.7 billion HealthSouth fraud stands as one of the largest accounting scandals in American healthcare history, a reminder that financial statements are only as honest as the people who prepare them.